I welcome all of you to another episode of the Vantage Point, the Masterclass series, where we speak to business leaders and get you real insights. Uh, Today, we have with us a very, very special guest. He's 86, but I can tell you it doesn't look a year over 65. His energy is amazing. He spent 25 years in civil services and then went on to join an automobile company, which is the most successful automobile company in India. And it is the fourth largest manufacturer of four-wheeler automobiles in India today. He's been at the helm of affairs now for close to 40 years, 81. I'm really amazed. 81 was when he joined Maruti. He has seen India from a very unique lens as a civil servant earlier. So he's seen bureaucracy very, very closely, and then being part of a very successful enterprise, which started as a government venture and then got funded by a foreign partner, and then went on to become a public company and became very successful, such that the market cap of this company in India is larger than the parent's market cap. So it's been an amazing experience. He's recently written a book called Getting Competitive, and it's a fantastic book. I think a lot of us grapple with this challenge of, on one side, the massive potential our country presents, and on the other side, the frustration or disappointment as to why this country is not able to fulfill its potential. I think it's extremely important for a country of this size to fulfill its potential as a duty to all its citizens. We have covered a lot of ground over the last 30 odd years, post 1991, when we did away with the license Raj, and where we opened up our country for many private sector players. However, as our author, Mr. Bhargava himself has written, we still have a lot of ground to cover. He's the winner of the Padma Bhushan Award, which is the third largest civilian award. So a very, very celebrated person, citizen of India. And I'm really, it's my pleasure to welcome him today for our Masterclass series. Mr. Bhargava, welcome. The way we will do this, sir, is if you can speak for some time on your broad thoughts on this subject and the book, and give us your key insights. It'll be nice, and then we can get into a conversation. We have with us here today Mr. Raamdeo Agrawal, who really needs no introduction to all our clients. He's the group chairman. He's been an investor in markets for over 30 years. His journey is legendary. His understanding of sectors, stocks is amazing. So it's really great to have two rich minds today evening to converse with each other, and hopefully I can, get some tangible insights from them for all of you. So Mr. Bhargava, first over to you.
Thank you, Ashish, and a very good evening to everybody who has taken the time out to join this webinar. I thought I'll just say some broad aspects of why I wrote this book and what were my motivations and what were my basic conclusions of why we are where we are in terms of our industrial development, manufacturing growth, and of course, economic development in creating a more equitable society. Why this has been a question which has been troubling me for a long time is the fact that in 1947, when we got independence, there was no doubt that India was better placed than any other country in the world to develop, grow industry, become a manufacturing hub, and become a powerful industrialized nation in the world. Because at that time, the rest of the world was all recovering from the effects of the war. And Europe was not a competitor. We didn't have Japan as much of a competitor at that time at all. China hadn't come up. Vietnam hadn't come up. We had nothing. On the other hand, we had a reasonably good infrastructure. We had given ourselves a democratic constitution. We had rule of law. We had outstanding people in this country. We had engineering colleges and business schools were set up pretty soon after independence. So all that you required for growth was with us. The natural resources, we had a steel industry at that time, thanks to Mr. Tata. And so we had all those advantages. We had a charismatic leader who correctly identified that the way forward for India was industrialization. That industrialization would lead to economic growth, creation of jobs, and would enable this country to create an equitable society which everybody wanted. We gave ourselves a socialist constitution. But having done that, something went wrong. And not only in the years after independence, but in the 7 decades almost that have elapsed since then, we could not correct whatever mistakes we had made. And we continued and we have continued to struggle to give ourselves even a minimal degree of prosperity, a minimal degree of comfort and respectability in their lives to the masses of our people. And I think that is something which I thought called for being looked at as to why is it that with all the advantages India has, and if you look at Indians working outside the world, you'll see how well so many of them have done. So there can be no question about the capabilities of Indians, the capabilities of their management skills, of their scientific skills, of their engineering skills, and yet in India we don't ever get advantage of those. So what has gone wrong? And I realized that by chance, perhaps, I have had the kind of experiences which almost, and in fact, I'm pretty certain it's very, very unlikely that anybody else will ever get this chance of learning what happens when you want to make policies, when you want to implement policies, what happens if you are in the public sector, what happens if you're in the private sector, what happens if you're sitting in the bureaucracy, what happens if you have a Japanese partner. Because in my 60 odd years of working life, I have gone through all these experiences. I have seen the whole effort to make ourselves into a developed, industrialized country from virtually every angle possible. And since I found that I was, I think, the only person who has these kinds of insights from different vantage points, I thought that it would be only appropriate that I put down my experiences, what I have learned, and what I think has gone wrong with India, and why we have not been able to live up to our potential, why we have, in a way, frittered away our legacy, which our forefathers got us in 1947 at the time of independence. Now, what is the basic thing which went wrong? And I think what went wrong was that the policy makers at that time, and policy makers were politicians, they were bureaucrats, I suppose more bureaucrats than politicians, economists, all of them were there to decide how to achieve the objectives of Pandit Nehru to industrialize India and at the same time create an equitable society. What happened was that the planners and the policy makers decided that they will achieve both these objectives of becoming a socialist economy and industrializing by combining the policies for this purpose. They did not understand that if we have to industrialize, if industry has to grow, then a industry must become as competitive as possible. Perhaps even the concept of competitiveness was not understood. Even today, I'm not entirely sure that a lot of people in government understand what is the actual importance of competitiveness in manufacturing. We, for example, have been seeking foreign investment to come into India after 1991. You remember the Foreign Investment Promotion Board was set up in 91 or 92. And we have been wooing foreign investment from that time, and that's now 30 years. Recently also, after this whole COVID crisis and all that, we have been saying that we must get the foreign investors who are moving out of China to come to India. But it's not happening. A lot of these people are moving to places like Vietnam and Cambodia and Myanmar and Indonesia, and only very few are coming to India. And that is because in the ultimate analysis, they find that they can manufacture more competitively in those countries than they can manufacture in India. That manufacturing in India still is something which does not give them that convenience and that confidence of sustainability and that confidence of manufacturing at lowest cost as they get in these countries. But when we woo these people to come to India, we offer various sops. We'll say we'll give, and it's good, we have given low tax rates, which is excellent. But tax rates apply only once you make profits. And if you're not confident of making profits on a sustained basis, the value of lower tax rates gets diminished. The main thing to do is to create conditions where they find that it's best to do business in India compared to any other country. And what is therefore required? As far as government is concerned, the most important thing government people need to understand is that the cost of manufacturing, the cost of doing business should be made as low as possible. Competitiveness is all about essentially cost and quality. The lower the cost, the higher the quality, the more competitive you become. There are other things, of course, like after-sales service and convenience to customers and a whole lot of things one can talk about. But the basics are cost and quality. And those are things which government still does not focus on, how to lower the cost of production in India. What all will help to lower costs? And it's not one thing, it's a whole multitude of things that go into it. I've gone into some of those there. Now, this is not to say that government alone has been responsible for our failure to grow in the industrial field. Because of industrial policies which were adopted after independence, the license Raj particularly, the industrialists also developed certain ways of working which were absolutely contrary to any concept of competitiveness or giving customers any value. Okay, up till 1991, we could blame government policies for forcing private sector to go there, though I'm not quite sure if that is a valid argument. Because I think despite government policies, you could still give customers much value for money. Maruti did start in 1983. That was before 1991. And we did give customers value for money, even in the days when it was not required to do so. So that's why I'm saying that I'm not quite sure if what I'm saying is really relevant, but I'm being generous to our friends in the industrial world. The period after 1991, there was no reason why industrialists should not look or did not look, by and large, of course there were exceptions, why they did not look to make industry as competitive as possible, why they did not, there were enough people with influence in government, they had ways of influencing people, why that influence was used only for private benefit, not for the benefit of industry, for industry as a whole to grow by making government policies tilt towards helping industry reduce cost and become competitive. But I think too many vested interests had grown by that time. There was too much attraction of easy money in the form of black money, tax evasion, and all that went with it. Too much attraction of the kind of lifestyles which develop when you have a lot of cash lying around with you. So all of that led to uh, both entrepreneurs as well as government neglecting competitiveness of industry. Consequence of that was that our management culture, which started off by being based on the Western management culture, and which was fine in those days because there was no other management culture which was available for anybody to look at. But I think after the 1980s or the 1990s, the Eastern manufacturing culture, which is vastly different from the Western manufacturing culture, should have been looked at, should have been seen whether in Indian conditions it would be more appropriate in terms of our political, economic, social environment than the Western manufacturing culture. I think people should have had more concern about what would be good not only for their companies but for the nation, because if the entire economy of the country had grown, every industrialist would have become much bigger than what he is today. Despite the best effort people have, barring again a couple of exceptions, are not really world class. Only a few are. But if the country had grown as many countries have grown, we would have been somewhere else. So I think that was missed out. The management culture still requires to be reviewed by every industrialist. Supply chains. We have the most, what should I say, suspect supply chains of any major country which wants to industrialize. When Maruti started, there was not one single component of the Maruti 800 car which could have been bought from any Indian manufacturer. The quality, the technology, none of that was good enough. There's no design capability, there's no engineering capability, there's no R&D. That is what we have done to ourselves. So in these conditions, becoming competitive becomes very difficult. Added to that is the fact that the public over the years has developed a strong distrust, not only of the politicians, but of the bureaucrats and the industrialists. I don't think any public at large, again, there are exceptions to what I'm saying, but leaving those exceptions aside, whether there is any general feeling of trust that industrialists or bureaucrats or politicians are doing a great job. Yes, some individuals are, and there's a lot of trust in them, but not as a class. And unless all these three get together and are trusted by each other and by the population, we will never create optimal conditions for growth and competitiveness. If you look at countries which have grown, whether it was Japan, whether it was Korea, whether it was China, whether it is now Vietnam, you will find that governments and the industrialists all work together, not in India. Because today, if government people start working with and cooperating with and facilitating private industry, the opposition parties will immediately start saying all kinds of things, that they have been sold out and that they are mixed up and this personal benefit, and that famous word which we heard at one time of "soot boot ki sarkar." So all of that will happen. So those are the obstacles which have to be overcome, which I have tried to analyze under different heads in my book, and to say what I think has happened and what needs to be done. So I think I'll leave it at this point. Now leave it open for questions and try and answer what you have to say in this matter.
Yeah, thank you very much. Raamdeo ji, over to you.
Yeah. So I think it was a fantastic summary of what is there in the book and what is your thought process. But the change demanded, or you think what can make it happen, is too dramatic, too revolutionary. I mean, completely first 30, 40 years we struggled with the socialism till 91. Then we went about dismantling that, and we have still not done a good job of that. Probably that is one reason, in my view. I think that cleanup is yet not over. And now you are saying that entire system should be, very Japanese type of manufacturing for this. Don't you think it is a very tall order? A country which has its own, more about it than me, but to have this kind of dramatic shift across the country, the three or four constituents coming together, that is one thing. But basically saying that Japanese style of manufacturing should be adopted here methodically. We can see the success, but isn't it a very tall order?
I do not think that there's any contradiction between socialism and becoming competitive and growing industrialists. I think both are required very much in India. The problem is that both cannot be grown by the same set of policies. You can't say that I'll tax industry heavily, I'll give inputs to industries at higher cost, so that the same inputs and the extra tax raised from industry products will be used to create socialism. Because then your industrial production becomes non-competitive. You have to separate out the two policies, and which Mr. Modi is doing, by the way, to a limited extent. He has implemented a lot of policies which are promoting the system of providing the poorest with economic benefits. And he's not doing it by increasing the cost of industrial production. If you take the opening of the bank accounts, the direct transfer of subsidies to these accounts, providing gas to people, providing health insurance to the weaker section, and so many other policies, housing subsidies. These are not at the cost of industry. But where we said that industrial manufactured products are consumed by the rich, and therefore we'll tax them heavily. Okay, you tax them heavily, but then their growth is retarded. And industrial growth cannot happen faster than the growth of demand. I think that was forgotten by our wonderful economists in this country. We've had outstanding economists, but they all seem to have forgotten that if demand is not in the economy, you cannot get industrial growth. It's very simple, but that's what we have done. So that's one aspect of it. Now, when you say of Japanese manufacturing, Raamdeo ji, I'm using this Japanese thing only as an illustration to say that the Japanese have used this method. There's nothing particularly Japanese about it. It's not as if it is specific to Japanese people or Japanese culture or Japanese language or Japanese religion or anything like that. What am I saying? That you should maximize the potential of the human being by motivating him to work for the benefit and growth of the industry, by making him believe that if the industry grows, he too will benefit from it. Now, what is Japanese about this? If we are talking of team working, like in a industrial manufacturing company, the workers in that company would be broadly around 70% of the total employees. Now, if 70% of the employees are not motivated to work for the benefit of the company, can the remaining 30% give optimal results? If all 100% work for the benefit of the company, you will get far, far better results than if 70% are pulling in a different direction. A lot of management time was spent in trying to see how to manage workers. You have to spend a lot of time in supervising them and doing all kinds of things which they could do themselves if they were motivated to work for the company, if they thought this company was in their interest. So that's all I'm suggesting. And there's nothing Japanese about it. But the fact is, the Western management culture doesn't really today, even most of it at least, work to create this kind of teamwork. And the result is that Western manufacturing has become non-competitive. So we are following a culture of manufacturing, a culture of management, which actually has led to manufacturing becoming non-competitive.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, fundamentally we have to become competitive. I mean,
so how to do that? I'm saying the best way to become competitive is to have total teamwork. Now, can you get total teamwork? Will workers cooperate with management? That's the real question. That what I am saying, it cannot happen.
sir,
It has happened in Maruti.
yes.
So it's not as if it can't happen in India. But what it does require is for our top industrial leaders to accept the importance of creating teamwork in their companies, of trusting the workers, of respecting them as human beings, of giving up this hierarchy which we have developed over decades. That because I'm born in a bit different segment of society, I've had better education, I live in bigger houses, therefore I'm in some ways superior to the guy who lives in a one-room flat. I don't think that superiority is consistent with teamwork.
Yeah. So, one of the things I have seen in India is that till about 2004-5, at least in the stock market, 50% of wealth was created by public sector companies and public sector banks all put together. 50%. And 50% was created by multinationals and private sector. Today, in 2020, the number has come down to 5 and 95.
Yeah.
It is a tremendous story of success of in last 25, 30 years, tremendous story of wealth creation, maybe not exactly in manufacturing, but this is a period in which even Maruti rose, Hero Honda rose, so we have seen private sector coming to the rescue or to the money-making opportunity. So what is most important, my sense is that give these entrepreneurs who are world-class an opportunity to really fulfill the demand, even the demand creation, what you talked about. First, we have the scale. The beauty of India is that like China, we have 1.3 billion people, but they have very limited purchasing power. So how do we create a scale and real demand? With whatever little we have. So like houses, I think the life goes in building a house in India. So, I see in Mumbai and many places, guys are very successful, but still it takes a lot for him to buy a worthwhile house. So, and houses are very unaffordable in India. In urban centers, a lot of places, houses are unaffordable. Houses and cars, I think these are two the largest purchases of any household.
Yeah.
So if by chance, by policy, if they make these two categories of demand of a consumer more reasonable, both are industrial because they have huge linkages. And then, once the demand is there, then I think industry will come forward to satisfy anything. What we are saying is that never has the a true demand has not been fulfilled in India. If it is backed up by purchasing power, and actually we have created a lot of globally competitive industries out of the local demand.
Absolutely correct. But then the reason why things like cars have remained subdued in terms of demand is because they were always considered to be luxury sin goods. Even today, the taxation on cars is in the classification of sin goods. If you charge a 45% GST on cars, when the rest of the world, I think the highest is in Europe at 19%. We charge 45% with our much lower per capita incomes. Now, how will demand grow in a poor country like India? Housing is partly the industrial lack of industrial growth. Our workers owned houses in the 80s itself, because instead of following the public sector policy, it's a laid down policy which we neglected or ignored, of building housing colonies and renting things. It took effort. I won't describe it here. It took a lot of effort, but we persuaded workers to form a cooperative and own their own houses. And this happened before 1990. And we arranged all the financing and everything, and we then also arranged that the installments would be backloaded so that as their salaries went up and their incomes went up, their paying capacity increased, so the installment would also increase. But then thousands of workers are house owners. They have been house owners for the last 30 years. Now, again, it's part of team building, because this was one of the factors which bought us a lot of loyalty from the workers, because they had never dreamt that before the age of 30, they would be house owners. We built a DPS for them. Now, good high middle class, upper middle class people can't get admission to a DPS in those days. I'm talking of the 1990s. A worker's children were getting admission to a DPS. So, there are ways of getting workers to understand the benefits they can get if their company becomes more and more competitive and grows. But today's world, when Lots of, why has Vietnam becoming so popular? The same reason that they all work as a team. And that's why people are going to Vietnam. We will not be able to compete effectively if we don't maximize our resources, which will promote competitiveness.
Sir, last question before we open it for the other people to ask question. One is this government changing policies. I mean, because of democracy, you have seen all colors of government, and for the first time after 30 years, we have a very stable government in the center. And but still, within the government also, a lot of people they keep changing. So, do you think this changing governments and say like till 2014, we had a one-way Congress government broadly. I mean, from 47 till 14. And now we have a very stable other side of the government, like BJP and others. So, I mean, in any case, the first one has not achieved the objective. And now you have completely new set of changes. I mean, and this is 130 crore Janta and already a very complex country. How do you turn around this shift? I mean, so this having this continuity of the policies is also a big challenge, isn't it?
Again, I think the policy makers have never understood what industry requires to function and why they would come to a country where they have a choice. I think we don't understand that people who have money to invest all over the world, they are not constrained to go to any one country. They have an option of going wherever they find conditions best. Somehow we have had a certain degree of arrogance in ourselves. And we have said that we are now opening up to you and you can't do better than come to India. We are doing you a great favor by allowing you to invest in India. So please don't this thing. So come, we are opening up to you. This is the 1991 situation, that we have such a big middle class and it's a growing middle class and we have all the benefits which I talked about earlier. So where else can you go except India? You must come to India. So that was our pitch. And amongst the things which we didn't realize, and I'm not sure if we fully realize it even now, is that stability of working conditions, which means policies, laws, regulations, is an absolute must for industry. There's no way I can invest in a country where I feel that they will change policies every 4 years, 5 years, because my whole competitiveness gets affected by a change of one policy. And if I'm operating in a country and I'm exporting 50% of my product to the rest of the world, I have to be globally competitive. And if a change in policy makes me uncompetitive, my whole viability is over. So I think this understanding of the requirements of an industrialist is what is lacking amongst policymakers. They are not able to think from the point of view of an industrialist. And that's what I've talked about in the book, about the lack of training, about the lack of understanding of the other man's point of view.
Ashish, would you like to take over from here?
Yes, sir. There are quite a few questions. I will, try and cull them for you. So on the same lines that Raamdeo was discussing with you, there is a question that is there some way there could be a common minimum program and incorporate that as a constitutional change, so that as subsequent governments keep coming and going, certain base policy decisions are adhered to. I think this is a question on this policy flip-flop from one regime to the other.
You can't do things by law. Fundamentally, let's accept that trying to do the right things by only putting it on paper, law is ultimately a paper. It doesn't work. People have to understand the importance of what is required. then whether you have a law or you don't have a law doesn't really matter. Again, I'll give you an example. When we signed our agreements with Suzuki in 1983, all the clauses are put in as the lawyers said it should be done. When we started working and Suzuki got confidence in the Maruti management, most of those clauses which required consultation with Suzuki, prior approval of Suzuki, payment to Suzuki, certainly, all ignored. They just did what was good for the company. We did what was good for the company, they did what was good for the company. Now, irrespective of which political party comes to power, if there is a national consensus that we need industrial growth in India, because that has nothing to do with politics, making the Indian people more prosperous than what they are, giving them a better quality of life, surely cannot be against any political philosophy or any ideology.
Right. Well said, sir. The other issue which you've written about in the book extensively is, the lack of skilling in our bureaucracy. I mean, you mentioned that we transited from the Indian civil service to the administrative services, and the bureaucrats actually bore the load of executing the policy decisions across many sectors. And bureaucrats have not been skilled over the years to be able to effectively implement some of these policies. So a question on the similar lines is, what steps should the government take so that some of these bureaucratic challenges in ease of doing business or which hinder execution of policies? Your thoughts, if you could elaborate on it.
See, our bureaucracy has been excellent in dealing with administrative problems and crises. You look at a Kumbh Mela, how well it is managed. When you have any emergency or crisis, the bureaucracy does very well as any bureaucracy anywhere in the world. Unfortunately, the bureaucracy has never been trained or specialized in development. And the other thing is that because of lack of trust, and because of the hangover of the imperial colonial culture, a bureaucrat or even a politician never will admit that what he has done can be improved or corrected or that he made a mistake. Ashish, in your experience, Raamdeo ji experience, how many times have you heard any politician or any bureaucrat saying that this particular policy which I made or this particular project which I started was a mistake? We don't admit, and there are good reasons for it. I'm not going to, I know as a bureaucrat, I know there are good reasons why we do this. But the fact is, we never admit to a mistake. Now, in my experience, what I have learned is that the best way of learning is when you make a mistake. If you don't make a mistake, you will not learn, you will not improve. In your organization, you should encourage your young people to try different things. And if they make a mistake, good. But they must learn from that mistake. The important thing is to learn from it, not keep repeating the same mistake. If you look at government working, we have kept repeating the same things over 50 years. Our delays, overruns in project execution. From the time of 1950 till 2020, 70 years, we still continue to have project overruns and project time overruns. And the same mistakes are happening. Why? Yeah. So there are some areas where the bureaucrats are not there. And that's why I've said that bureaucrats should get an exposure to industry by some selected people who will then remain in the industrial area, being exposed to industrial working by being there, and they have to be trusted that if somebody comes and works in Maruti and he goes back to government, he will not become a Maruti mole in the government. He should still be trusted to work as an independent, objective policy maker, but he knows how industry works. And then these people should remain in that part of the thing. And the second thing is that if there's trust with industry, then industry and bureaucrats can keep exchanging views and ideas and problems. And, discussion helps to learn. Where have I learned? I didn't know any of these things about industrial management. I've only learned by asking people and listening to people and seeing people what they do. Now, if I can learn this, and I did this not only here, but I did this as a bureaucrat, whether I worked as an agricultural production commissioner, which I did for 4 years, and I had a whole range of things like agriculture, horticulture, animal husbandry, sheep breeding, forestry. Now, I learned about all those things, or in the energy ministry to learn all about the power sector. How did I do it? By talking to people who knew what it was. Now, if you don't encourage people to talk, then they'll never learn. And if I'm a government servant and a private CEO comes and talks to me and spends 2 hours at my house and has a drink with me, and if after that he said, "Kare, to pata nahi kya ho raha hai, iske ghar mein falana aaya tha," then it becomes very difficult for anybody to learn. Right. That's the problem.
Right. So, sir, related question. I mean, in the same era, in the 80s, this company Maruti was born and became extremely successful. And you did mention that one of the reasons for the success is because you didn't go back even for a rupee back to the government. It was profitable with very decent ROEs, and you grew by increasing capacity by investing internal resources. So in the same era, you have so many public sector enterprises which went sick, and many private companies which went sick were nationalized. So what is that secret sauce? I mean, you spent close to 40 years in this company. What is the secret sauce? I mean, why did this work so successfully?
Well, there are many reasons for it, Ashish. Yeah. But amongst those reasons is that from the beginning, we were determined not to make the mistakes which were being made in the public sector. And amongst those were, we did not allow any kind of political influence, either in giving contracts or in recruitment of people. We did not overstaff ourselves. And we did this partly by making rules for recruitment, which made it not possible, because we said for workers, we will only recruit people who are high school and ITI pass. Now, the people who politicians recommend are rarely people who have high school and ITI. Usually they are not educated people. So we said, look, he doesn't qualify, our rules don't permit, and these are rules which the Japanese have approved. So we can't recruit him. So that was one. We were lucky initially in the first 2-3 years when we were selecting our partners and all that Mrs. Gandhi did not allow anybody to interfere in the selection of a technology partner. In fact, earlier on, Renault had been selected. And there were some issues about Renault's selection, and the then minister lost his job because Mrs. Gandhi was not convinced that that was quite bona fide. So that was lucky. But then we kept this up. We did not allow political influence. One of my tasks as MD was to tell my people that, look, I will take care of the political pressures. You guys work on merits. Leave the political part to me. And that's how we worked. It did get me into trouble, as I mentioned in the book also. But then at least only one guy was exposed to that. The rest of the organization did not get involved with that. So that was the other part of it. The third, of course, was that from the beginning, we said that we will try and be as much consumer-centric as possible. And in that, I must confess, it was partly personal experiences in buying and owning a car, which I had before I joined Maruti. And I said, surely this is not the way we should run a company. We should not let our customers get the kind of experiences I've had as a car buyer and as a car owner. And so from the beginning, because of my own, that was one area I had some personal experience of this industry. The rest of all, of course, zero. That we tried to adopt systems which may give us, in fact, I should tell the dealers that today you are just distributors of cars. You're not dealers, or you're not doing any selling, you're only distributing, which is a fact. But remember, someday you will have competition. So better start learning how to function as if there is competition, focus on the customer. And I think this customer centricity does not exist in any public sector.
Right. Sir, there is a slightly nuanced question on manufacturing. So there is a lot of talk now of contract manufacturing. You have the basic manufacturing industries, and contract manufacturing is picking up in a very big way. And the government is also trying to roll out policies to support this sector, like production-linked incentives, reducing the taxes for someone setting up a plant. So any thoughts on that between basic manufacturing and contract manufacturing? Where do you think this type of opportunity is large for India?
It depends. If your contract manufacturing is only assembly, let's talk of cell phones, where I think the maximum amount of this contract manufacturing is taking place. Apple gives its entire design and it gets components manufactured according to its specs. And I guess they must be seeing that the quality is assured and all that. And then these contract manufacturers make the investment in manufacturing, in assembling actually. They don't do much of manufacturing. And I'm not sure exactly how Apple functions, but they must be having some arrangement to ensure that even in the assembling processes, the systems and the work flow and all that is as per Apple standards. Over all these years, they must have optimized this whole system, and that is being followed, so it can be done. But let us take the car industry. Normally, no car manufacturer would do contract manufacturing because there are critical things which have to be actually manufactured. You're making engines, for example, or you're making gearboxes, or you're doing body stamping. Now, you can have a vendor for those also. It's possible. But most manufacturers prefer not to do that because then they feel they have better control over the performance of their product. But I suppose if you got somebody whom you could trust to do this, but even if you do contract manufacturing in cars, you'll manufacture from another car manufacturer who has the same quality standard. I don't think you would use the Apple model on a car. So it depends from product to product also. Right. Our Suzuki plant, that's contract manufacturing, but actually it's not. it's only in name, legally it's contract manufacturing. But this is a Suzuki subsidiary, Maruti is a Suzuki subsidiary, that's a 100% Suzuki company. They're using the same technology, same system, same everything. The components are made by the common vendors and they're supplied both to the Gujarat and the Haryana plants.
Right. Sir, question on the automobile industry. I mean, this whole debate about hybrid, electric, I mean, let's say 5 years, 10 years down the line, a lot of countries have clearly laid down their plans in terms of, by 2030, they will have X percentage in electric. I mean, what are your thoughts on it, sir? I mean, how should India as a country look at this?
One new factor which has emerged, which I don't know when we will take into consideration, is the strategic aspects of lithium. Today, electric vehicles use batteries which are lithium-ion batteries, so far. The bulk of the global lithium supplies are controlled by China. Now, if we switch over completely, let us say not by 2030, but let's say 2040 to electric cars, it means we will be having total dependence on imported lithium. And that total dependence, unlike oil, which is at least 5-6 countries, will be controlled by one country. That's one strategic dimension which I believe should be considered by policymakers. And we shouldn't just go for electric cars because it is the in thing to talk about electrification and clean energy these days. Because it can become a very costly proposition also at some point. The other point, of course, everybody knows that in India, small cars electrification today is not viable. Costs are too high, there is no infrastructure. So the consumer is not willing to buy electric cars, especially at those high prices. So again, the same question we discussed, if the demand is not there, I cannot manufacture. Government may dictate anything. But if the consumer is not going to buy, what do you do?
Right.
Making plans is easy on paper, but somewhere the demand has to be there. Genuine demand.
Sir, a lot of companies in India are MSMEs and SMEs. And obviously, the health of many MSMEs and SMEs is not that great. I mean, given the kind of changes we've witnessed over the last 3 years. Your advice to MSMEs, SMEs on how they can become competitive and grow their businesses, any thoughts on that?
As I've said in my book, the current SME policy is not suitable for supply chain SMEs. Supply chain SMEs need to be now operating at a much larger scale of operations. Because you're not talking of making cars of 100,000, 200,000, you're talking of making millions of cars. And SMEs are critical links in the supply chain. Their quality and cost will ultimately, and competitiveness, will determine the competitiveness, quality and cost of the car manufacturer, of the OEM. These SMEs need to have engineering capability, need to have R&D capability, need to invest in the best of tooling and equipment, need to hire properly trained people. Can you do this with the limits which we have today on investment in SMEs? Our own experience as SMEs is that in many areas, we were running for years and years and years, we've run into problems, whether it's in heat treatment, whether it's in electroplating, whether it's in plastic molding. But these are all run on comparatively very small scale. There was no tool making capacity, tool maintenance capacity. There were not trained people around, really trained people, with no engineering capabilities. So you didn't get the quality and cost.
Right. A last question on, in India, over the last, 73 odd years, as they say, short-term change is not visible, but over the longer run, it impacts you very significantly. I mean, over the last 73 years, in spite of all the challenges we've had on bureaucracy, policies, we hit $1 trillion of economy in 2006, 2007, and added 2 trillion. I mean, we're close to $3 trillion now. And many sectors, we've seen private companies coming in and building, one can say world-class companies. And the change is visible on the ground in terms of aspirations, per capita incomes going up. So we've seen many, many changes happen in fact, in the last 30 years itself. And in many industries, we've probably adopted technologies even before the world has adopted. Like, we went straight from landline to wireless and now 4G, and we're talking about 5G. And you had such a rich experience. How do you see us, we are eternal bulls on India. I mean, we are, from an equity house. So we are extremely positive, sir. So I just want to know your vision for India, let's say 5 years, 10 years down the line. And pockets of opportunities for entrepreneurs.
What you say, Ashish, is absolutely correct. And this is what, over all these years, when people criticized India for not growing adequately, then the people in authority, and I was one of them at one time, we trotted out all these achievements we had, whether it was achievement on the space front, and we've had achievements a long time, or on the nuclear front, or in our steel mills, how many steel milling capacities we've had. And there was hundreds of examples in the last few years, where it's a telecom sector, whether it's a airline sector, we've had lots of success stories. But the issue is that India is a very big country. The beneficiaries of all these excellent industries goes to how many people? Out of 130 crores, how many are the beneficiaries of these things, and how many of them are able to lead what would be considered to be a decent, respectable living standard? Ultimately, a country's overall development must not be confined to a segment of the people, let me put it. Everybody must get a certain minimum standard of living. Otherwise, if there's a 10% layer, which is as good as the 10% layer in the US or in Europe, but the remaining, the bottom 30% is living in abject poverty, to me, that's not acceptable. And my being in the top 10% doesn't make it any more acceptable, frankly. So it is necessary that we consider what is happening to the bottom of our pyramid. And while all these wonderful things have been happening, I'm not denying anyone, it's all valid. But there is still that bottom of the pyramid in India today, which is hugely deprived. Hugely. And you see that everywhere in winter. If I go out in Delhi, I still see people sleeping on the roadside. I find small little kids going around with hardly any clothes. I mean, it's sickening to see this kind of thing happening in India 70 years after independence. How can we satisfy ourselves and say that we are doing very well in India? Anybody who says that, I mean, political leaders do say it, but are they really talking of India, or are they talking of a small segment of people? It's not right.
Absolutely. So chatted for over an hour, and it's been a pleasure. I really didn't realize how time flew, and I can tell you it's been a very enriching session. A lot of takeaways and insights, and I'm sure participants have also found a lot of wisdom in today's conversation. Raamdeo, any parting thoughts? Your closing comments?
No, it's pleasure to listen to him. As in any number of questions you throw on him, what comes out of him is just a sheer pleasure. So, sir, it has been very enriching, and I'll keep looking forward to your statements on various subjects. I mean, particularly, manufacturing, national development. What could be? I'm sure you are in Delhi. You have friends in the corridors of power, and they will use your rich. One of the things is that you have the cumulative advantage of telling the people. I mean, the kind of not competitive advantage, but you have cumulative experience and advantage of knowing the history of India, and you are the ultimate nationalist. You are Padma Bhushan awardee, and I think you have been honored even in Japan. So I think I hope our government, our policymakers, bureaucrats, they take maximum use of reading at least this book, and please send as many copies to your friends. And I mean, it's really so well written. It's an ultimate. In fact, whosoever has edited, I think he has done a wonderful job. It just flows very smoothly. So it is one of the best books I have read in recent times. And since we are all Indians, we are looking for answers, some futuristic stuff. I think this has been a treat. So thank you very much for spending your precious evening with us. And I will always look forward to talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Raamdeo. These words coming from you are really high praise because you are a doyen of your industry. And for you to make these remarks, it really is very, very heartwarming. So thank you very much. And I'm grateful for this event. I'm thankful for your organizing it. And I hope the participants have had something to take home from this.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, sir. On that positive note, we can end. Like Raamdeo said, your words carry a lot of weight in corridors of power. So looking forward to much better days ahead for the country and for the economy. Thank you.